Well, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Dan Hardy, and I'm going to be facilitating the conversation in our breakout room. I know it takes a little bit of time for different technologies to bring everybody together, so we'll give just another few seconds. I think we did have about 100 people in our plenary session there, so we have 7 different breakout rooms. You've all been invited to a room essentially on a random basis. And so we're welcoming, it looks like we have about a dozen people, which is probably about what we'll expect to have. I also want to just introduce Owen Robatino, and Owen and I are going to tag team on facilitating this discussion. I'll kind of lead the conversation, and Owen's going to be a note taker. And as Jennifer mentioned, we really have 2 big topics with 2 different ways that we're looking to both collect ideas from you in the next hour, and then also encourage you to both get online in the next couple of weeks, as well as spread the word so that other friends and neighbors can also join and contribute ideas online. Before we begin, I'll just kind of reinforce a couple of sort of ground rules. Looks like we still have a few more people coming in, so that's good. We will both use the chat box still, but also encourage you to unmute yourself. I think we've got a small enough group that we'd love to have people telling us things orally in addition to typing in the chat. Again, remember that we're really looking for ideas, and we're looking for the things that that you are interested in seeing and what your considerations are on trade-offs in terms of particularly the where and the how that the county should grow. I'd love to invite everybody to type into the chat what part of the county you live or work in, kind of where is there a geographic area that you're focused on, just to share that with everybody. And as you do talk, it might also be helpful just to mention who you are and if there's a particular part of the county that you're focused on. But we're going to be interested in hearing comments countywide. And again, we are going to basically try to take the next hour and divide it up into 2 different kinds of categories. And so I am going to share my screen to show kind of the first part of that element, which if you recall the maps that we were looking at. Oh, and actually one thing I should just also double check on, Owen, have you started recording, or are you able to record our breakout room?
I hit the record button, so at the top of my Zoom screen toward the left, there is a red button blinking. It says recording.
That's awesome. So we are good to go. What Owen's next going to do is to drop into the chat box the URL at the top of the screen. And again, what we'd love to do is if you want to join in and click on the URL and start contributing online, you're welcome to. We do think there is value in having you kind of hear what other people are saying, more so than being focused and contribute your ideas by voice. Rather than right now diving in. But one thing that you'll see is that this is the same map that we presented in the PowerPoint slides, but you do have some additional information on the left-hand side. That's some guidance for when you do go online or share this with friends and neighbors to increase the public participation and the transparency of the process. And it also lets you do some kind of just zooming in and panning around. So if there are particular questions or we want to focus on an area, we have the ability to do that. But again, I think the real value here is primarily just the dialogue that we'll be able to have amongst ourselves. And so again, for this first 20 to 25 minutes, our focus really is on the where to grow. A reminder again that the areas that are shown in the dark tan colors are those community area master plans that are already in the process of moving to the planning board for consideration. So certainly comments about those are still welcomed, although those are in a process already to go to the planning board. So that might be a good direction to take those comments and address them towards the planning board. Churchman's Crossing, again, is shown in hashed because it is a plan area that is under development but has not yet completed its planning process. That will complete during the fall. And then again, the purple areas are just reminders of places that the technical staff do see some opportunity, both based on data that's out there, as well as some public commentary that are both areas within some of the corridor master plans. I know there have been comments about the fact that Route 202 is a very narrow corridor within a fairly wide geographic area, but also areas that are outside of current master planning efforts and may either be places that would benefit from a new area master plan, or maybe places that just general countywide policies could help direct the where and the how we grow. So with that preamble, I'd love to just kind of open it up to anybody that would like to start the conversation with either a comment about what they'd like to be seeing or a question about the where and the how of growth. And hopefully you should also be able to click the unmute button if anybody needs some assistance with that. Again, we'll kind of do a general conversation.
Hi, I'm happy to get things started if you want.
Absolutely.
This is Dee Durham. I'm the county council person from District 2, which is sort of the western half of Brandywine 100. And I don't want to speak really for the rest of the county, but I can tell you right now that the purple that's behind the word Greenville should just, you could delete that right now. That's not going to fly, and that's not going to be welcome.
Okay, which area was that? The purple at Greenville?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin there on my map. I don't think you'll be able to see it.
That's right. So one thing is Owen is going to be, doing collecting comments as we go along, and when all of the comments are completed, which will include both the work done during this next hour as well as the next couple weeks of public comment, that will be available for everybody to kind of see what the comments were, both live during this session as well as individuals putting information on the maps. I should also mention too that when you do go to this map to place your own comments on the map, if you go in more than one time, you will see your multiple comments the first time you're in there. Should you leave and then come back again, your prior comments will have been recorded, but you won't see them again. So each time you join the map in a new session, you're able to still continue to add comments. You just won't be able to see what you had there before. But then at the end of the process, all the comments will be compiled and distributed publicly to everybody.
And I have a question about Greenville. I'm supposed to explain the choice of no or minimal change for Greenville. And what I put down tentatively won't fly, but would there be something?
Well, I can add to that we already had that fight a few years ago with the Stoltz proposals for Greenville, various different parcels in that purple area, and the community overwhelmingly said no thank you. So I think that fight has already been fought, and it's just, I can tell you that you should delete that purple or to save yourself some agita in the future.
Okay, so I'm thinking of writing prior opposition to development.
That fight has already been fought, and the community clearly spoke.
And as time goes by, are there things that you would like to see in Greenville? Is it simply keep the status quo, no change, or are there other things besides what was before you in the past that would be things you would like to see happen in Greenville?
Well, I will leave that up to others that are the stakeholders to that area. Obviously, change does happen, but I don't think people are looking for growth there.
So I'm putting
we just approved we just approved the Pet Narrow project for the old airport site, the old Barley Mills site, so that's done. So I don't think there aren't really any other parcels, I think, and the community, as I said, for the Stoltz project, the community spoke about their feelings about significant growth in that area.
Okay, great. And Owen, I'd suggest that do the best that you can. We obviously have the meeting being recorded, so for our own purposes, we can certainly go back and edit if we want to re-listen to the tape. I know we've got about 15 or 16 people in
Yes.
here.
Okay.
So is there, let's maybe hear from other folks as well. Any ideas for things you'd like to see or not see in certain areas of the county? Again, focusing on where and both where and how we grow.
This is Dustin Thompson. I'd say that, in a number of these areas, there's only a certain demographic that can afford to live in them. So I would say more mixed developments where you have a variety of housing options, some of which are a lot more affordable. And some of these much nicer areas of our county would be nice.
So just generally diversity of housing options, throughout the county.
Yeah, particularly around that northern rim.
Great, great. Any additional thoughts or comments?
I guess I would concur with that. Jen Atkins, I'm in Wilmington, and I guess I also would just say that I would tend to support, without seeing more of the details of all these purple areas, the places where there's infrastructure. I know that was one of the things that was probably thought about when those were put together. But if we're not expecting our population to grow, then why are we growing? So we should be careful to put things in place. Really, I guess what I'm saying is that we really should focus on redevelopment and not developing new green spaces and turning them into paved spaces if we don't have to, because we already have infrastructure somewhere else, which obviously would be, where possible in existing towns and cities like Wilmington, Newark, wherever, but also just where there's existing infrastructure, where there are already, I know in some of these corridors, there are shopping centers and things like that that aren't fully utilized because they're just older. So we need to find a way to get those back into action before we create new things like that.
So you've raised a couple of really good points that might be helpful. Obviously, the purple ovals are conceptual, so they're not strictly they're not parcel level, but many of them are kind of the corridors where there was, because of the transportation facility, a lot of commercial development, and that is often aging. In some places, Merchandise Mart comes to mind. Some disinvestment and opportunities to not necessarily have a whole bunch of increased jobs in housing, but to get reinvestment in those places. So a lot of the purple areas are thinking about those opportunities to the infrastructure is there to some extent, and how can we improve upon it. Two other thoughts is that while Newcastle County does not control the municipalities that are shown in dark gray, when we've done our scenario planning, we have considered that some of that growth will happen within the municipalities. And so, what's going into Wilmington in particular, a number of folks have said Wilmington used to have 112,000 people. Now it's at about 70,000. Is there an opportunity there? There's, inter-jurisdictional planning that can happen there. And then also you'll notice that we've highlighted part of the infrastructure is the historic rail line where we now have SEPTA service, and that the Newport is one of the communities where there is, old historic infrastructure for the town of Newport, and the possibility for a future SEPTA rail station that is already, something that's under study. So that's, again, thinking about how do we take infrastructure like the rail line and maybe make some investment like a new station that would help make that area a little bit more accessible.
Right, and I think from the perspective of concentrating the new growth in existing cities and towns also is important. What Dustin said about, we also need to make sure that we're not just putting certain kinds of people in certain kinds of places. Like there needs to be opportunity for all kinds of people to be in all kinds of places.
Yep, very, very well put. Other thoughts from others? And as people are thinking about it, I'll also mention that, again, the idea is, I believe August 2nd is the date that we will confirm this at the end of the session, is the date that we would love to have people, complete their exploration of the map and putting comments and pins in. So there is some time. But to the extent that it's great to hear ideas bubbling up already from some of you, and if there's others that agree or disagree or have a slightly different spin for one part of the county versus another, that would be great to hear.
I have a question. This is Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Hey, I'm looking at the map, and I live in the Frenchtown Woods area, just south of that one bubble you have, where the bypass of 896 goes around 40. So I'm south of there, and they're putting in, yeah, just a little bit to the left. Right off the Old County Road, they're putting in, and this is really what got me right, pretty much where that arrow is, a little bit above it, where Old County Road is. They're putting in what is known as Harmony at Glasgow, which is senior center. And what got me involved, because my community is right behind there. Old County Road, if anyone's ever driven on it, is one lane in each direction, and there's no shoulder at all to speak of. They're putting in a senior center, and what got me involved was they were zoned a certain way, and then they came in, they went, they built above this, and they tried to get zoning to change. We've since fought back, and we're really, we actually, that sounds, we think we're okay with that, but it's like, now it seems like, I'm surprised I'm not seeing anything down below there. So you're not anticipating any further growth, because I just see houses being built between there and the canal, but I'm not seeing, I would have thought there'd be, I mean, that looks optimistic to me, but we're prepared to try to save the Frenchtown Woods, which is, one of the few areas in Newcastle County that, has a lot of habitat for wildlife that, is being driven out with all the houses they're building left and right and then pushing into Middletown. So my thoughts are, I'm just curious why, I guess you're not anticipating any further growth below that area, or?
Well, that's a really good opportunity to clarify. So I really appreciate that question, that as we looked at these different scenarios, and again, the goal here is not to say pick a scenario, but to look at how those scenarios help us stress test ideas. And that the purple areas are where we see the infrastructure is there, and often it's transportation infrastructure, sometimes it's water and sewer infrastructure, or other elements that, there's already what we kind of call as planners good bones for a system. And that you're right, that without strategies that help us focus growth into those areas, the market will tend to, go towards sprawl is a loaded word, but you will tend to see more greenfield development. And so that there is both a push and a pull here. And what we're focused on here is the purple areas are opportunities that the technical staff saw for kind of pulling and trying to direct growth into those areas where there is infrastructure. And then the counterpart, which isn't shown, is that those areas that are white would be less likely to see greenfield development. So again, that kind of concern that, how do we not only incent development to go into areas where there's infrastructure, but also disincent development to happen elsewhere. Some things, like one of the things we'll talk about is transfer of development rights is one thing that you could be doing to say areas that you don't want to grow, but have zoning capacity to basically be able to say that zoning capacity could be bought off of a farm field and then applied to increase density in a place where there is infrastructure. So that's just one example of a strategy on that list of overall strategies that kind of does that balancing directly. Other strategies might be things like, wetlands or forest banking. So that, again, the idea is that somebody that is working towards pulling development into a purple area might be able to take some of the, through a planning and zoning change, take some of the effort they might have put into building that site, and, some afforestation or wetlands protection might not be right there next to that site, but might be helping preserve areas where growth is less desirable because it's less efficient. And so again, 2A versus 2B, to the extent that scenarios are a helpful tool, that's really the difference between 2A and 2B, is that they both have the same amount of growth. 2A is much more let the market decide where that growth occurs. 2B is much more use policies to help incent the development to go where the infrastructure exists.
Okay.
Dan, can I ask you, wetlands are already protected and TDRs really don't function and aren't really a program that is driven by the county. It's a developer-driven process. So what exactly is the county proposing to put in the comp plan that will incent development in the purple areas and disincentivize in the white areas?
Well, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, in about 10 or 15 minutes when we feel we've kind of covered the where to grow and talk about the how to grow. Again, I think that with all of these questions, if something hasn't seemed to work in the past, like a TDR program, maybe the question is why, and is there a way it could be done a little bit differently? And some of the questions in the chat, even in the plenary session, were things like, we're already protecting wetlands, but are we doing it well enough? And so I think, there were some questions about sea level rise, for instance. How do we deal with what the wetland protection should be in 20 or 30 years as contrasted with what it is today?
The sea level rise question was mine. I'd love to see concrete, specific steps that the county is going to put in the comp plan to not even just disincentivize, but actually prevent development in the white areas.
Mm-hmm. And so again,
I haven't heard that yet. I mean, I think honestly, in my conversations with constituents, that's what everyone wants to know. And I haven't heard it yet. And frankly, the last couple comp plans, that's what the community has expressed. And we just don't see it happening decade after decade. Sprawl continues on. And, nothing seems to change.
So are there things in particular about do you have some ideas for what you would like to see as a stronger way of doing that protection? Other than, and part of it could be as simple as, let's just make sure that we are looking to protect greater amounts through whatever we designate as, define a wetland buffer, define a forested area. Those are tools that can be used to help do that resource protection. And it is true that there needs to be a little bit of a balance so that to get investment, and again, investment doesn't necessarily have to mean growth. I keep on thinking about Merchandise Mart because I grew up not far from there, but just ways to say, how do you make balance the ledger so that the private sector does see a value in both doing better at protecting those environmental resources, but still being able to pencil out an investment in a property, whether that's restoring an existing use or changing the use.
In the purple areas, great. In the white areas, that balance is out of whack and has been for decades. And I'm not hearing how the county is proposing to change that balance of power.
Okay, and with the balance just basically being the ease at which land is consumed for greenfield development. That's what I'm kind of hearing.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, well, let me ask just for folks we haven't, because we'll come back to that as we talk through the strategies in the second half of our breakout session. So kind of hold that thought and let me see again, are there other folks we haven't heard from that would like to express a thought, particularly about the where we grow on the map?
You've heard from me, but I'd like to express a couple more thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah, Dustin Thompson again. So, driving through some of these areas, around about where I live and do advocacy work. I live on Kirkwood Highway, and one of the issues are all up and down that corridor is the lack of connectivity. You have a lot of residencies behind that corridor on either side, but there's no connection whatsoever and no safe way to connect right now those residents to those businesses. And so you have to get in a car, you have to drive. And so I would say in terms of the growth in that area, I would say more in the terms of connected infrastructure and connected development with the businesses that already exist would be ideal. And almost a similar story to the Churchman's Place, except the lack of residencies. There's not really residents there. You have businesses that pop up and go out of business left and right. Even large chains can't operate for very long in that purple zone around Churchman's Crossing. And so I think part of that is the businesses that are there are so disconnected from any residents in and around that area, even to the nth degree more than what you find on Kirkwood Highway. At least Kirkwood Highway, there's houses around, whereas the Churchman's Crossing area where the businesses are, restaurants and that sort of thing. You know, Second and Charles, that center with Second and Charles, I mean, businesses come in and out of there like clockwork. I think so. The growth in that area really needs to be focused on bringing, if you're going to have a lot of business there that are retail and rely on a customer base actually going into the storefront, you need to bring residents to that area and again, in a connected way. Whereas and I'm just my last one, then I'll stop. But, you know, the Route 9 has a huge issue of around industry being so close to residencies and a complete lack of resources in terms of, you know, moderate market retail. It's very low income driven retail, a lot of dollar stores and low, you know, low value food and low nutrition foods sources. So bringing in markets and non-heavy industry as to serve as resources for those communities that can offer them safe employment and help bring back a little bit more of a balance to the lifestyle around the 9 is something I've heard a lot about.
So that kind of makes me think of a couple of different responses. One is that, you know, you've probably seen in the slideshow that mixed use in general is often a way to get people closer to opportunities, whether that's healthy food or jobs or just services and retail. So the idea of places like Concord Mall or Christiana Mall, both having some houses maybe on the site or proximate to the site, and then you know, within a development site, looking for you know, what we tend to call interparcel access. You know, better connections from one pod of development to another for, you know, all modes, but really focusing on bicycles and pedestrians, as well as taking, you know, what often is a little bit challenging, both in terms of community acceptance and in terms of just the environmental cost or capital cost, is providing those connections from a site like Christiana Mall. And I forget the name of the community just to the north, but, you know, there's a dirt path that people from that community use to walk along the ramp and get to Christiana Mall, and trying to formalize those kind of connections so that you do get that better connectivity. There's also in Churchman's Crossing a future, you know, what we call a paper street, a future road that probably will not be built as a road, but could be built as a pedestrian and bicycle path to bring a community closer to the commercial areas. So yeah, all really good ideas. That again, that idea of interparcel access. Oh, and also going to mention that for a development site, what we call reduced buffering. And so often, even in a mixed use area, there might be some rules that suggest you need to still keep the commercial part of your development site X number of feet away from the residential site. And that kind of goes back to just old zoning rules that said people and jobs don't mix together. And so there's some legacy, you know, keep 50 feet or 100 feet or 150 feet apart, which often means, well, you got to pave something to connect those two. And since there's very few slaughterhouses anymore being built, which were, you know, 100 years ago, very good reasons to separate, you know, industry from residential. We still have the Route 9 corridor places where there are industries that need to be separated from residential, but in a given development site, trying to reduce the distances that are being created between residential and commercial is really valuable. And I think we're about halfway through, so I'll do one more kind of call for any other comments about the where, and then if not, we'll kind of flip over to the how and focus on the strategies a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Hi, I'm Julie Rakowski. We live in the Back Creek neighborhood. I don't see any purple markings on the areas that I am concerned about. However, I know that there is something coming in called Country Club Estates potentially. And I just have concern about, you know, we live in a neighborhood with its 2-acre properties, and there is a plan for some high density housing coming in. And it makes me concerned for, you know, we moved to this neighborhood because we liked that the neighborhood was quiet. There wasn't a lot of traffic coming through, and all of those things. And I have concerns that, you know, we live right near a blind curve, and the neighborhood would connect right there. We have small children that ride their bikes. I have concerns that if you're putting in high density housing, they're already building schools upon schools to create room for our kids to have, reasonable sized classes. The traffic patterns, it's a big concern for us. So, I know that land has always been planned to be developed. I have some major reservations about it being high density and overpopulated. Our neighborhood is quiet. It's more on the rural side, which we love. And that's why we moved here. And to put, stacks upon stacks of, 200 plus, apartments along with townhomes and single family homes, it's just going to be a population boom that I don't think we're prepared for, not to mention how it's going to affect the sewer. Like, I know that there's a sewer system plan and we all have septic, but we're going to be forced to put in, attached to the sewers at some point if something goes wrong. So I just wanted to voice our opposition to those situations.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And it sounds like that's something that maybe moving forward. I mean, yeah, we want to make sure that we both pass along to site planners concerns that we're hearing here, but also that that you're plugged into the ability to work directly on that. But it sounds like a site plan that is fairly imminent in contrast with the sort of 30-year horizon of the
Right.
area plan. So, and appreciate the comments, and I also appreciate that you've got it sounds like you have a future public meeting attendee already getting his or her first start.
Yes, she's opinionated.
I've been putting pins on the map for these besides Greenville, Frenchtown Woods area, Kirkwood Highway, and Back Creek area, basically for no or minimal change, because that's the only way I can enter the comments.
Thank you.
The Kirkwood Highway, I wouldn't say no or minimal change.
Well, I tried.
It's not my comment.
But that's the only way I could put the pin in. Otherwise I have to choose between those choices, the town center, the economic hub, and there was a third one. So I just put a pin in and put a comment.
So that's good, Owen. And a key message again, when you do go on online, you will see what Owen's describing is that there are a couple of drop-down menus. Do you favor choice A, B, or C? And I believe you do have to pick one of those. But then there's an open-ended field, which again, we're not going to do a lot of recording of all the details right now, but we can go back and listen to the tape to put those details in at a later date. So Owen, don't worry about the details right now because we'll go back and listen again. But it is a good reminder that when you do that yourself, that you will see some drop-down menus, and that those drop-down menus then lead you to tell us more, in your own words. So I'm going to kind of flip the discussion over, and hopefully you'll still see my screen. But we have another survey, which is you can take online. Again, Owen will drop this URL into the chat. And this is not a map, but very much more a traditional kind of online survey. And it's called Future Scenarios because we developed this under the scenarios, but it's really not asking about the scenarios. It's really asking you about some of the key strategies and trade-offs. And what we've done is, again, suggested about 6 different proposed strategies and some ideas about trade-offs. And in our next 20 minutes or so, we don't need to get through all 6 strategies because, again, this is really priming the pump for the kinds of things that you might be able to do on your own time. But the idea here is to basically suggest in proposed strategy 1, we'll start with that and use it as an example, that we might designate. The county might say, these are the places, and maybe there's some of the purple areas without Greenville that where we really want to encourage the growth and the land use mix. And then there are some regulations. Perhaps part of that incentive is to reduce impact fees or reduce parking requirements. And again, impact fees are a double-edged sword because you need impact fees to provide for the public sector, to provide for some quality and elements such as schools, as was mentioned. Parking requirements, again, where you have the ability to have people walking, biking, taking transit, that kind of is a win-win because, as I mentioned, we've overbuilt our parking, frankly, nationwide. And so that's an opportunity to be trying to help the market be more efficient themselves, as well as come up with better development. And the term form-based code, many of you know that, again, the idea of historic code development called Euclidean zoning after Euclid, Ohio, from about a century ago, really was that idea of keep the slaughterhouses away from the residential communities, and that form-based code doesn't get rid of use-specific zoning entirely, but it really focuses on, for uses that are generally more compatible, what is the form you're building? How tall are the buildings? How close are they to streets? What kinds of pedestrian and bicycle and streets do you have for them? So it's less about the function of the use and more about the form that helps drive how that's used. So those ideas are all kind of, bundled into one strategy. And then what we are hoping people will be able to do is to some very simple trade-offs. So, because we know that there's a wide variety of opinions, and like one thing, for instance, trade-off 2, I'm going to start with just because it's the simplest, it's the fewest words, that if you're looking for more walkable developments, you're often bringing people closer together, get more affordability, get less walking distance, but you're getting rid of or having smaller yards. And there's the folks that say, boy, large yards are really important to my way of life or my business. If you're raising alpacas, you're not going to, you need to have a yard for them. So again, we'd love to have people just kind of start looking through these trade-offs, and just I can scroll through this as is helpful, but just these ideas of trade-offs, and for that first strategy particularly, that idea of, is it attractive to you to look for ways where you do incentivize, again, that pull growth into those purple areas, which will help reduce the idea for sprawling elsewhere. But I'm also already hearing there should, from some of you, there should be a counter to this strategy, which says don't only pull the development into those purple areas, but also kind of push it away from the white areas, if you will. And again, I know that this is something where if anybody reacts to this, has a thought just on this first one, that'd be great. The other thing we could be doing with our time is to just kind of quickly, if you're not looking at this on your own screen, to quickly kind of talk through the proposed strategies overall and then see what resonates. And so hearing none yet, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of do a quick, summary of the different strategies. And so one of them, again, we kind of heard a little bit before, is to look at, in every new, significant development, not every single house being subdivided into 2 necessarily, but certainly every development that has a number of new units, to incorporate affordable housing in those. And those could be another acronym, moderately priced dwelling units, which is basically requiring a set aside of some percentage of those units to be maintained as affordable over the lifespan of the development. But there could be other affordable housing options. One of those is, accessory dwelling units, the idea of what used to be called the granny flat. Or my favorite example, if you remember Happy Days, Fonzie lived in an accessory dwelling unit over top of the Cunningham's garage. So that's another strategy to increase the diversity of housing. One strategy that's sort of in there too is maybe approving housing units based on floor area ratio, so the amount of space for the development rather than the number of units. And what that does is it says, rather than saying you're limited to 16 units, you say, well, that would be, if it was all single family housing, that would be perhaps 35,000 square feet. So you've got the right to build 35,000 square feet, but you, the market, get to decide, if I can get 120 units instead of 100, they all tend to be smaller, and then therefore more affordable on average, and perhaps more diverse as well.
So if I can jump in here, my name is Sherry Evans Stanton. I'm really curious why we are starting with increased development instead of looking at preservation, dealing with climate change, flood control, etc. Every time you build a development, you are increasing flooding in the county. You are polluting the water. I just don't get it. And we keep talking about more and more development. We're not talking about, stopping industrial development. We're not talking about any of the issues that have been brought up in every forum, in every deep dive. And so I'm just starting to wonder why you're asking the public for input if you're not going to listen to us.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think it helps. Again, we're not asking you to just pick scenarios, but part of the value of scenario planning is the hopefully those scenario outcomes that, impervious surface was one of the things that really gets at some of the things you're mentioning, and that you can get more development and actually reduce impervious surface. And that there is a fiscal trade-off as well, which is that if the county was to say, we want a moratorium on growth, a couple things might happen. One is that you would continue to have, what we've called the wilting rose. And it's not just that more is better, but that often accommodating some growth is a way that property owners can see to reinvest in their properties. And what we're looking for is the ways to try and do that because it is a comprehensive plan about how much and where we grow. The flip side is that, again, if we said moratorium on growth, it's just not going to happen, then the things that you're looking to do would still require, fiscal resources to do it. And one quick answer to that could be higher taxes. And that is, I think, I don't have these memorized, so I think that might be one of the things we have in here. I'm going to just, again, kind of slowly go through these because that is certainly a trade-off that's an option. We should do more with preservation, and that, to do that, boy, there were some comments about, taking property rights away and so forth. To be able to do that preservation often does require some dollars, and that there's a choice between looking for private sector reinvestment to help achieve those goals, or looking for the existing businesses and residents of the county to, put their dollars towards achieving those goals. And so I think
there's also a way that if you're going to allow the county to develop more, this is a 10-year plan, not a today plan. And you could mandate that every new building has to meet sea level rise projections, that it has to be 100% renewable energy, put solar panels on, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of what we're talking about here, which is these are areas that could potentially be growth areas, and we're going to do the same old, we need to be a little more forward thinking in these recommendations.
Okay, and that's, again, I think the idea of those sort of purple areas are the places that we see the greatest potential to have change occur through private sector land use, and come up with better outcomes overall. Won't solve every problem, but to really focus on those areas where we already have the infrastructure invested in. But to your other question, strategy 5 does look at, what are some of the things, is it a good idea to just look for purchasing land or development rights, and it really, is for the purpose of preservation. That doesn't say that explicitly in strategy 5, but that is the goal. And do you do that through, again, looking for grant programs, federal government grant programs, private, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on, who the folks are that sponsor the public broadcasting system, looking for folks who will help support that financial impact, or is it maybe through taxes that would be for businesses or residences? And then impact fees, again, are something that the term impact fee does mean as part of the development process, that you're offsetting some of the impacts of that new development through paying a fee for the public sector to do that kind of investment. So, maybe there's some more discussion just about, ideas about what are these trade-offs, which of these A or B would you prefer? Again, either in the conversation now or as you fill out the survey online.
Question on the ones you got on the screen there, which is where I got down to as I was going through myself, Dustin here. If you want to have more protected or preserved land, aside from just stealing people's property, the county somebody has to buy it or own it. So in order to have more protected or preserved land, wouldn't you thereby need like higher development costs, higher taxes, or less spending? In order to do A, wouldn't you need B on the trade-offs?
Well, boy, that's a really good comment too, because the intent, which I don't think we were as clear as we should have been, is that A is more protected, preserved land associated with redevelopment or with development, so that as development came online, to say, rather than setting aside, again, the current wetland boundary or delineated area, you now need to add another 100-foot buffer around your wetland. That's one way to have the private sector protect or preserve more land, or to dedicate more land to parkland or school sites or something.
So that would be status quo, but with bigger buffers or more setbacks.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. That's something. And so two other things just to kind of mention. One is that on this survey, unfortunately, you do need to go in and do it once. The map you can go back to as many times as you like. This one, if you start the survey but don't finish it, you can go back and do it again, but you will not see what you already did. So you can go in as many times as you like, but to submit your responses, you need to go through and complete it all the way to the end, or it won't get saved. And that what people who are not in this meeting right now will also be able to take the survey. It may look a little bit different just because they didn't have those people will not have had the introduction. But I will pass back on to the team that it probably would be helpful for everybody to see if this more protected preserved land could be clarified, that it would be as, through the development process. That's a really good point. And again, the very last strategy, well, you know what, I kind of was looking for that trade-off particularly. So let's kind of just go back through. Sounds like people are already exploring them. So we've talked about affordable housing. We talked not on the screen, but in general about the idea of, what's meant by more permissive zoning in residential districts is, I kind of mentioned that example of letting somebody have a square footage instead of number of units to build. Looking at impact fees again to say not just pay an impact fee based on the unit, but perhaps disincentivize larger homes by having the impact fee increase based on the size, and that the idea that in parcels that have a single family home could have that kind of granny flat, or the technical term is an accessory dwelling unit. So that's the strategy 3.
We already allow those.
And I think that I understand that they're allowed, the detached are not allowed, so that you can have the granny flat if it's part of your building, but that you can't build a separate building on the same lot. So there's a little subtlety there. So I think you're right.
I think they are allowed, but I will check that out.
They
Okay,
are
good.
allowed if the lot is big enough.
Okay, thanks,
For
Owen.
the lot size, but a bigger lot, they can be allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like if you have a lot that could be subdivided, you could put another building on that lot without subdividing it.
You know what the minimum is? Was that Dave?
Oh, that was Owen.
Yeah, that was.
Oh.
Owen.
You know what the minimum is?
Well, I can try to look it up in the code quickly.
Okay, my thought is just that they're already allowed, and so Dan, you've mentioned it a couple times, and I just don't think that's the kind of solution we're looking for. I think, like Sherry's comments and others' comments and comments I hear all the time from my constituents, they're looking for something much more, a much bolder, bigger, overarching approach to preserve open space, to direct growth to redevelopment areas, like your purple areas, absolutely. But the purple areas have to have some significant approach to preserving the white areas. And just saying that we're going to encourage more granny flats is that's not the solution that I think the public is looking for.
Okay, and that's really, really helpful. So like I say, we'll kind of move on to the idea of, flexibility of parking requirements. So again, this is one that may be closer to a win-win. And one of the key terms that I don't think we mentioned before was the idea of unbundling. So that essentially when you look to invest in something, whether that's a whether that's your own home, or whether that's a retail space, that you basically are not forced to buy the parking spaces that are assigned to you, but that you're able to choose to, I want a place without a parking space, or I want a place with a parking space. And then that helps the market reduce the demand for overall parking. And then I think we're kind of one eye on the clock. We're just about done with our time here. We talked about strategy number 5, and then strategy number 6 really is there's a lot of focus on the value of being able to move around the county, but that the idea of another set of acronyms that LOS stands for level of service, and most of you are familiar with that in terms of development approvals, but looking at the quality, for particularly in encouraging people to walk, bike, or take transit, that it's less about the capacity of those systems than it is, as other folks mentioned already, about the ability to connect with those systems and the degree to which particularly vulnerable users, pedestrians and bicyclists, feel comfortable. So that's why quality instead of level. And shifting towards accepting some more congestion in order to focus the investment of not just developer investment, but the physical space on accommodations for walking, biking, transit, is contrasted with single occupant vehicles. And so then the last thing that we'll talk about, we can still comments on anything, but for the last few minutes here, one of the things we'd like is, again, any thoughts you have, and I think we've heard some already, so that's great, in terms of where this planning process is and how much is on track. And I think there's the biggest takeaway I've been hearing is that idea, and I've used the term push-pull, is that we've identified several pull ideas, but that they would draw development to areas with infrastructure, but that there's a fair amount of interest in complementing that with push things that would effectively preserve more development in the areas that are white on the map. Again, I'll make a pitch that as you move away from this meeting, please do share the URLs you've seen and get the word out that we are looking over the next few weeks for much more input. So more is always better. Spread the word, please. How much do you like about or don't like what you've heard about housing options, parking impervious surface, transportation, and accessibility, where again, accessibility in this meaning is not just, Americans with Disability Act, but about the access to jobs, shopping, healthcare, healthy food, other quality of life things. I'm sensing that some people are hearing, I haven't heard enough yet about open space preservation and access to open space. And then again, kind of the mix of uses and development patterns. And the open-ended comments here, which again, in the next, I think in about 4 or 5 minutes, are going to bring us back into plenary session. So anything that anybody wants to kind of offer as their final thoughts, at least for this evening, and then the discussion will continue over the next few weeks.
This is Sherry. What I would say about development is that you need some new policies that other counties, particularly in Pennsylvania, adopt so that the developers stop getting away with murder, that they are required to have less impervious coverage, to have a higher percentage of their property donated as open space. Some of it can be parks, some of it can be forested buffers, for example, that it clusters developments instead of having 1 acre sites, and that it can be mixed use developments. There's really not been much discussion about that. It's sort of these are the areas that we need to grow in, or potentially, but nothing really concrete about what you're going to do about it.
Good point. And so, things like some communities do what they call impervious surface caps, which, you need to make sure that, right now it's 1/7 of the county roughly is impervious. You need to keep your development site to a maximum of 10% impervious, which is, lets the market then decide how best to achieve that. Going vertical, clustering, as you mentioned, those types of things. Good thoughts. Are there any other kind of concluding? And Owen, I haven't noticed, we got a little flashed about half an hour ago that we were halfway done. I know we're committed to getting you out on time, so I think we should be seeing a 1 or 2 minute warning, because we will go back into the overall plenary group just for a little bit of a kind of what happens next discussion. And if nobody else has comments, I want to thank everybody, because we got a lot of really good feedback, and everybody was really constructive. So appreciate the contributions that everybody made tonight. Ah, okay, I see. I just got a notice that says we have 5 minutes left in our breakout session. So we're going to be close to getting you out at 8 o'clock, assuming you come back for a minute or two of plenary.
I would say that, one other bit of feedback, as we're thinking about industries coming into some of these places, or retail coming into some of these places, or development in terms of housing stock coming into some of these places, there needs to be a stronger consideration on working a little bit more on a gradient of lifting some of these places that are, have a higher percentage of moderate or low income, to make sure that what's coming in is affordable to the area, but will bring growth to the area. If we can develop in a way that's more on a kind of a gradient in terms of what resources we're bringing into the area to not push people out, but help lift them up through increased opportunity, certainly we could do a much better job than what we've seen in some of the parts of, I live in Wilmington, so what we've seen in some of the parts of Wilmington where they drop something into an area that the people that are currently in the area will never be able to afford, and end up driving up real estate, driving up property, and ended up eventually forcing folks out, particularly renters in the area, forcing them out because they don't try to gradient the develop, they just drop in high income resources into low income communities and gentrify them out of existence.
So good point. And when you're using the term gradient to describe, a range of, housing options in this case, right? So not just replacing one type of housing with another type of housing, but the gradient meaning a range of options, a range of diverse options. Is that a fair statement of the
Right, and don't drop a Wegmans into a low income community.
Yeah, yep, good. It's funny, I see we're going to be brought back to the regular room in about 50 seconds. And it is funny that, how many terms change over time. So gentrification is now kind of a bad word because people are realizing some of the concerns that occur. So trying to reinvest without forcing the people who are already there that you're trying to help to relocate. Very good point.
So
All right, well, I think
to summarize what he just said, basically he wants more affordable housing. Is that a good summation?
Yeah, and again, the word gradient is good, but it's a range of affordable housing. So not just all affordable and not all priced out, but to be able to be considering about all the different levels of affordability that would attract a diverse.
Not just housing